Now, I'd love to ask you for your questions. Do we have someone who wants to kick off
Meryl,
the questions this morning?
before we get into those questions, I've got these 4 really warm,
Yes, I'm going to do that. I'd like to invite the candidates to come and have a seat at the front, just so that we can ask you quickly and efficiently for some answers. And I will ask you to keep your answers as short as you can. Thank you. Do we have someone who'd like to kick off a question this morning? You'll start the ball rolling. Nick Swanson,
So
Harvey
we
Norman
need you to
Computers.
talk into the mic so that the guys can get your question on the webcast.
Hello, welcome. I just have a question about, we're in a regional centre in Maitland, obviously. We constantly see government basing themselves too much in the Sydney area. There's a real opportunity for us to get some of those government organisations and just big business in general to come to the Maitland area. My question is to whoever wants to answer that, it's not to anyone specifically, is do you have a plan to get big business here into Maitland? Because the more people we get employed in this area, the more we'll stimulate the economy. Or is there any plan to get any of the government organisations, the big government organisations that state use towards the Maitland area, and how can we incentivise them?
Excellent question, Nick, and that's really one of the focuses for our chamber is decentralisation of government agencies. So do we have a volunteer, Jenny?
If you look at the last Labor government, we brought up the Office of State Revenue's Infringement Processing Bureau here, and also the Minerals Resources. So we have a record of bringing that and decentralising to regional areas. The Liberals have cut jobs. They've cut jobs out of community counselling, so that's 30 jobs out of the region going. They've cut $3 billion out of health, so that's health jobs going in our region. And again, as I said earlier, if they don't keep the existing hospital, all these jobs that they're talking about, they're not additional jobs. I mean, there will be some, obviously, because it's a bigger hospital, but it will be less than will be under having the 2. Thank you.
Anyone else want to make a comment? Yep.
Great question, Nick. I think it's really interesting that we talk about governments bringing departments to Maitland. What brings big business to Maitland and what brings government departments to Maitland is having a city that can support it and an infrastructure that can support it. We've got the highest youth unemployment, I think, in New South Wales outside of Western Sydney at 16%.
16%, yes, that's correct.
If we bring a government department here or we bring big business here, all those kids aren't magically going to go and work there. Right? It's not the answer to our problem. It does help the city and it does drive business by bringing those there, but businesses have got to want to come here and they've got to want to have some sort of incentive. And I think it would be a great result for the chamber movement to be advocating for some sort of payroll tax reduction for businesses to move out of the Sydney metro area and move regionally. I think it's a far stronger argument from the chamber movement than it is from any one candidate.
Thank you, Steve. Do we have another question? Craig, I know that you have
I know
one.
Duncan's keen. He's ready to go. Look at him. He's fired up.
Excellent.
Yeah, g'day, Duncan from the New South Wales Business Chamber. Infrastructure is on everybody's lips this morning. The HEF has done a great job here in putting some money back into the region. The Baird government, though, is allocating $6 billion to the development of the Regional Infrastructure Fund. How will you ensure that funds are allocated, well, the funds that are being allocated to the region isn't going to be concentrated on centres such as Newcastle, but money is actually going to be spent here in areas like Maitland?
Great question. No Newcastle or Maitland.
Thanks, Duncan. You obviously got a question sent in by a member. Look, I think we've shown over the last 4 years that Maitland is not the poor cousin of the Hunter Valley. You know, we've got $45 million worth of roadworks going on at the railway station roundabout. We've got $20 million put aside for early planning work on the hospital. We've got $2 million from the HIF ready to go on the upgrade of the town hall. We've got $7 million from the HIF ready to go when council's ready to go on number 2 sports ground. There was a $5 million low interest loan came out of that HIF for the first stage of the levy. And I know council have put an application into the Resources for Regions Fund for for stage 2 of that. So I think we've shown over the past 4 years that Maitland doesn't miss out. Unless you've been hiding under a rock or you're not a media junkie like the four of us, you would have seen that last week, or earlier this week, we not only announced $7 million for the upgrade of the New England Highway here, but we also announced $2 million for Tokal Road. I don't think we're missing out. I think in the past 4 years we've shown that we don't miss out. And if I get elected as part of the next Baird Liberal government, I'll be campaigning that we get more than our share.
Can I just intervene there, Steve? And I'm going to slice in with a couple of questions as well. While we're speaking about infrastructure, can you speak to us about the hospital situation? It was front page of the paper. It's a hot topic. I know it's not as such a business-related question, but I know that there is a lot of concern in the community. People want to know what is going on with the existing hospital. Will it stay as a fully operational hospital? And briefly, perhaps touch on the funding mix for the new hospital. What's going on there?
Well, before we get to the hospital, I know Phillip wanted to just make a bit of a comment
sorry,
about the last question, so we might get to that first.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. Look, I think we've taught ourselves to accept the. I don't want to say pittance. It's not a pittance, but we're being fed a minor amount, and we're accepting it. We got 3% of a Hunter pool of funds for roads the other day, and it was front page of the Mercury. We've learned to accept that $7 million, thank you very much, can we please have some more? You look at what we get by comparison for the wealth we generate, the population issues that we have, the growth that we have, and we just roll over and go, well, thank you very much. You know, we deserve more, we should expect more. We are doing better than we did do, and certainly the last term of government we did better than we often have. We got a minor amount announced the other day with the Premier. God, I hope he comes back, because he's got to be offering more than that. You really have to be offering more. We're learning to accept a pittance, and we deserve better. I'll give the microphone to Jenny.
Yeah, I think in the last Labor government we had $400 million was spent on Maitland, so we weren't missing out in that sense. I also want to look at the costing. So if you look at the rail issue, $340 million from the port sale, that was Maitland's share. Do you feel like you got value from that being cut off from Newcastle? And people that talk about the revitalisation of Newcastle had to start, have a think about who put in the law courts, who put in the started the negotiations with the university. So we were actually moving towards services in that. So I want money for infrastructure funds coming to Maitland to build infrastructure, not destroy that we already have. And as you know, I've got a background in transport, and for me that's a really key issue, because we look at socioeconomic demographics of people with good, solid transport links like rail. They always do better in situations like the GFC. The other issue, just to get to your hospital one, my concern about a public-private partnership is we had a $20 million promise for a new hospital, and that seems to be, okay, 5 to 6, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be more now on consultants, a free site. If they do a PPP, it'll be they won't have to pay for the building cost of that. That'll be done by the private sector. It'll then go to management of a private operator. So that means it's subject to their decisions, their business decisions about what services are getting delivered there and how they're getting delivered. We look at the Port Macquarie experience, and they ran out of money to do hip replacements by March of a financial year, and then said, well, we can't do this. The government had to step in and get it back. So the Auditor General of New South Wales said that we paid for that hospital twice, and then we gave it away. The PPP that Robin's been talking about in consultations
that's a public-private partnership, just for...
Yeah, sorry. It is a private, but it's a legacy one. The nuns aren't in the business of running hospitals. This hospital won't be the Mater, it'll be Healthscope or Ramsay or another, you know, one of those big companies, a lot of whom are donators to the Liberals. So, you know, this is a concern, and the staffing ratios are not mandated in the private sector. So when you go to your public hospital and they have to report on their staffing ratios, and they are set at specific targets for patient care, whereas when you go into the private ones, they are adequate. Now, if you're happy with adequate care that's not reported on the levels, I don't know, I'm not. That's not what I want for my kids and my family. So I'm very concerned about that. And it will leave us without a public hospital in Maitland. There will be public services available, of course, in a PPP. But... Thank
you, Jenny. I'll get you to wrap up there. John wants to comment, and then Penny has a question as well. So,
just going back to your original question about the money aspect, there is no guarantee for that. There is no guarantee that what it's going to come down to is something that Jenny spoke earlier about. It's going to be the fight that's within the candidate, the sitting member of Parliament. The fight that's in them to get what their city deserves. So that's what it'll come down to in the end. In regard to the hospital, all this talk about the hospital, I think we were in discussion the other day about it. I think we're going to get the first beds in about 2020. Was it 2020? Is that right? What's happening to the hospital now? The funding is pitiful. The funding that we're getting in Maitland Hospital is not adequate enough. My concern is the hospital right now, right this moment. In the next, 8 or 9 years before we get the new hospital, if we get the new hospital, our current hospital is bursting at the seams. The funding is far inadequate in comparison to areas like Western Sydney. Now, Maitland is missing out on our proper funding for our hospital at the moment, so forget about the future. What about now? What's happening now? So I'm very concerned about that. So if we get in, if we have some power in the state government after this election, you can rest assured, because the Greens now know about the situation at Maitland Hospital, we will be fighting to get proper funding for our current hospital.
Thank you, John. I'm just also being the timekeeper this morning, and I'm just saying that we were going to finish at 8:30. My clock has decided to die. Can someone give me a quick... 8:34. So we'll continue. Is everyone in agreement? We'll continue on for the next 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'll wrap you up to let you get to your own businesses and keep the economy going in a real sense. Penny.
My question is, I suppose, there's two parts. One is that it's around transport, and then it's also around the interface between state and federal government. As most people in the room would have heard about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which we all, I believe, think is a wonderful idea, and I am in that situation obviously too. However, one of the things we're finding in this, where we have we're gradually going over to a national scheme and working with states still on the current funding. Very often, what is happening when someone gets a package for from the scheme, the big problem ends up that transport is not included in that package. When we live in this area, we're talking about going between here and Newcastle all the time, but there's a far bigger issue happening around this area where if you want to go to Dungog, there's one train in and one train out. So basically, I guess the two questions are broadening the thinking around transport, and secondly, the interface between state and federal government in the future.
Thanks, Penny. And timely question, given the Disability Services Minister was in town yesterday for a meeting with Endeavour Group. I've said all along that I think there's a bit more to this public transport debate than 3 stations in another electorate. Yeah, we're cutting the rail line at Wickham. I actually think it'll revitalise that part of Newcastle, but that's not answering your question. So, look, as somebody involved in the sector, I had somebody say to me as recently as yesterday, they live 20 minutes from Maitland. They've got 2 children with a disability, and they're doing 200 kilometres a day ferrying those kids around because there's no public transport services. Clients that live at Muswellbrook, and there's only 1 train a day, and the timing doesn't suit. So I think we need to focus on the real transport issues around Maitland, which are the public transport issues and that are bigger than just 3 railway stations. We need to be looking at more bus routes to connect the city, and we need to be looking at connecting our city to the other towns in the region. Your other question about the connectivity between state and federal governments, the NDIS is a really interesting test case because in a lot of cases, state and federal don't really work together that well. It's one or the other. And this is something where the 2 governments have been forced, or 2 levels of government have been forced to work together. From what I understand, it's working okay, but there are still teething problems with it, and with the NDIS in particular, and getting those 2 levels of government to work together for the outcome of the client. So, look, if I get elected, I'd be strongly advocating that we work closer together, and that the quicker we transition here in Maitland, we can get involved in that ironing out process a bit. There are still kinks in it, but from what I understand, it's starting to work better, but it's a rollout, it's a pilot. So,
just while we're passing the microphone, if I can make a a journalistic observation. I do find it somewhat curious that we've got a proposal for the Lower Hunter Hospital that doesn't really sync with the nearest train station at Mitford. What is that? It's a major, major piece of infrastructure that is not syncing with another important stop.
With respect, it's not my job to represent the government, but I think you'll find that lot does largely back onto that station. Just coming back to
It's
Steve's...
not that close. So, am I wrong here?
It basically backs onto the back of the reserve at that station. But anyway, you'll be hard.
It's a long walk, Phil, from there
especially
to the
absolutely.
entrance. Like,
Absolutely.
Are we going to? I'm just making an observation.
You'll be hard pressed to find a property that size right next to a station anyway. But just coming back to Steve's comment earlier about the cutting of the train line and the fact that will benefit Maitland, will benefit Newcastle. That may well be, Steve, but you're applying for the job to represent the people of Maitland, and we're the ones with the issue regarding that train line. Absolutely, I'm sure that disability, and Steve knows well from his involvement with disability, as does Penny, but surely transport is a major factor in that, and it's very important. We don't just need extra routes, and I know the government has recently announced some support in that regard. We need buses, we need the general public to be willing to use them. We have an issue with people thinking that it's lower socioeconomic people that only use public transport. We need to change the thinking on that. I think we should give John a chance if John wants to talk.
Yeah. If you know anything about the Greens, then you know that we're very much in favour of public transport. That is one of the key issues of our campaign, of course. Cutting the rail lines into Newcastle, one of the worst decisions the government's ever made. Who's going to benefit? Anyway, I'm not going to go there. What we're looking at is increasing public transport for this area. That's what we're looking to do. If you look at the number of services we have in the train stations from Maitland, we need to increase those. We need to have them running every 15 minutes. They talk about low patronage, but once you have the regular train and people know there's going to be a train, I reckon you're going to get lots and lots more people on the trains to use it. Also, we need to expand the rail lines to increase public transport further north, and particularly Dungog and those areas. The roads, if you're going to go up to Dungog, the roads are shocking, terrible. They need more public transport. So if you know anything about the Greens, you know how much we are in favour of public transport.
Just on that increasing the frequency, I noticed in the Mercury the other day, one of their flashbacks was 2009. I think we had a Labor government then. They were increasing the frequency of trains. But to answer your question, I think this government's totally abrogated its responsibility to disability. They're one of the only, according to sector workers that I've been speaking to, they're one of the only state governments that's not putting in disability services properly. Like they're just relying on the federals to put money in there for them. And when you look at what's happening, you know, even from the very first year that this government was in office and talking about transport for disability, how many kids were left on the side of the road in the first week of school in 2012 because this government, our Minister Berejiklian, who Transport Minister, couldn't negotiate contracts with people who provide those school services dedicated to disability services. Now that is an absolute disgrace. You've got kids who are waiting for school buses to go to schools and they've got a disability and it's not arriving because the government couldn't get its act together to do contracts. Labor has a strong commitment to people with a disability. That's, you know, we at the federal level put together the whole concept of the NDIS to try and get the states to work together. We need the Baird government to step up, and if they're not going to do that, then they need to get out of the way and let people who actually care take on the responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I'll get you to close there. Again, is there any other questions that you would like to put this morning, ladies and gentlemen? I think in the interests of time, we might wrap up there this morning. Thank you so much for your attendance. I know that it's going to be a long, slow wait for these people for the next 5 weeks or so until the 28th of March, and probably you'll have lots of work to do in your business. I commend to you the candidates, and I invite you to vote well and wisely on March 28, and thank you so much for your time.